This has been a journey. This has been a very long journey. As I am filming today in early 2026, this journey has lasted just about a year, start to finish, and I'd like to think that we're not even really at the conclusion of it yet. You've joined me for the conclusion of the dramatic, finest piece of colonial numismatics I've ever encountered and probably will ever encounter in my 50-year, give or take, numismatic career. If you are new to the channel, my name is Dub C. I want to thank you for spending some time with me. Hopefully you'll go ahead and click on that subscription button, become part of this community. This has been a wild ride, and I'm going to relive just a little bit of it with you here today. If you are one of my returning subscribers, especially if you have been watching this whole process unfold, and again, I'll get into that in just a moment. I appreciate you being with me on this. This is amazingly fortuitous. This is something that I never expected to happen. The fact that I had launched my channel and gotten to the point where I am at least competent in making videos so that I was able to document this as this wild ride unfolded. It's been an amazing journey, and I am so pleased to share it with you. If you are new to the channel, I like to begin my videos with a simple disclaimer. I am not a financial advisor. I'm not trying to offer any kind of financial advice. I'm simply trying to share some of my experience having bought and sold precious metals and rare coins for the last 30 or 40 plus years. And I also like to begin my videos with a couple of definitions that we can kind of fold back into the subject. I'm going to hit you with one that you're probably familiar with if you have been watching this channel and paying attention to this story. And again, I'll put a link to the entire group of videos that start at the very beginning and work to where we are today. If you have not yet had a chance to watch those videos, I think it's been an amazing journey. The concept I wanted to share with you is a bit. In the case of the coin that we're going to be talking about here today, it is BITT, but it's also just often called a bit, BIT. And that really has its roots in what we're looking at down here. These are Spanish colonial silver 8 reales. This was really kind of the first global currency. These pieces made with silver that was mined within New Spain. So all of the areas that were owned by Spain during the colonial period that had silver mines and were operating and extracting that silver. So we're talking about small parts of North America, but a big chunk of Central and South America especially. These pieces were coined into these large size silver pieces, and they were often used in the Manila galleon trade, that is loaded up in the new colonies, sent across the Pacific Ocean to the Philippines or even on to mainland China, where they were exchanged for export goods, rare silks and spices and porcelain and cloisonne and everything else that the European traders, the Spanish traders in particular, thought that they could make money on by shipping back across the ocean, working those goods all the way across the South and Central American continent to waiting ships that would sail across the Atlantic Ocean all the way back to Spain. So this was an important trade route that lasted for literally hundreds of years. But the nice thing about these pieces, and something that we encounter in the United States, is that while these pieces were actually legal tender in the United States all the way up until 1857, often they represented just a little bit too much wealth. So these pieces, and you're seeing an example here that has chop marks on them, those are punched into the surface of the coin by Chinese bankers and merchants. This is a good way to see that this coin actually did make that thousands and thousands of miles of journey across the oceans to China and the Philippines. These were often cut down. They were often cut in half, which would clearly represent half of the value of the 8 reales, the reales being the denomination. And sometimes those halves were cut into half themselves. That would make a quarter or 2 reales. And then sometimes those pieces were also cut into half also, and that would make the individual reale, or if you want to think about it in terms of American currency, it would be essentially 12.5 cents. 2 of them making a quarter or 25 cents. And that is where the expression shave and a haircut 2 bits comes from. These individual 12.5 cent pieces represented a bit. So in that expression, it was 2 of those bits becoming essentially a quarter or at least a quarter's worth of silver. These fractional pieces did circulate in the United States. This was not an uncommon thing to see. The value is essentially in the silver content, not so much in the coins themselves. Back then, it was the silver that people were after. So cutting these into smaller pieces was actually a pretty logical thing to do. It was quick, it was easy. The pieces retained a little bit of information on them, so people didn't need to have to re-verify them. You didn't have to go through the process of melting them down, turning them into planchets, and striking those planchets with a new denomination. It was as simple as taking an axe or a very sharp knife and literally cutting these pieces into little pie slices. So I have been looking for these Spanish colonial pieces for many, many years, easily decades. And most of my local dealers are kind enough to put these pieces aside when they come in. They know that they'll be able to flip them quickly to me because I really like having these pieces. And I reminded some of my dealers about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, that while I do like the full-size Spanish colonial pieces, and I do have some of the smaller coins that were actually struck by the mints that Spain was operating at the time, I have never really had one of these pieces that was cut down. And I think there is something kind of romantic and also allows you to really reach out and touch the history that surrounds these pieces. One of the reasons why I am so fanatical about collecting coins in the first place, being able to engage directly with the history that these people would have encountered hundreds and hundreds of years ago. I've never had one of these pieces. And I reminded one of my local dealers in passing, hey, remember, if you ever come across one of these pieces, a legitimate 8 reale that had been cut, please let me know, because I'd love to pick one of those up. And lo and behold, one of them said, yes, I've got one of those. I know I've got one. It's in the way back inventory. And I know just how deep their inventory is, and I know that this was way on the back burner, so it doesn't seem like it was something that was going to happen anytime soon. But fair enough. It's nice to know that they look out for me. And then all of a sudden, this dealer in particular reached out to me and said, hey, I finally found that piece that I'd mentioned to you. Next time you're in, stop by, we can work out a deal. So I was excited, hightailed it over there. And what they offered me was this. And if you've seen the rest of the series, you know very well what this piece is. Really briefly, this is an 8 reale, right? This is the exact same coin that we see here. This piece had been cut to represent those individual bits that I talked about earlier. You've got a full half here, then you've got 1/4, and then you've got these 2 smaller sections that were essentially this quarter cut in half to make the individual bits. This is a great illustration of what these pieces would have looked like, the damage that would have been done to these pieces. People weren't collecting these at the time. This was really money. This was wealth. This is what they needed to get their hands on. And coinage always in insanely deep demand going back hundreds and hundreds of years. So these pieces that were cut up was not an unusual thing at all. The problem is that these pieces that my dealer offered to me had been cut in recent times, right? This was something that dated back, I am estimated probably something in the 1970s or maybe the early 1980s. And you have to remember that at the time, 8 reales were not especially sought after. This was not an especially rare coin. There were many of these out there. The run-ups in silver had caused unknown millions of these, or at least hundreds of thousands of these, to be melted. So the fact that one of them would have survived and somebody had just made an illustration out of it to kind of show what these pieces look like is not too far out of what you might have expected the way that people would have treated these pieces back 30 or even 40 years ago. So I was a little bit disappointed. I have to say, I was really expecting something that showed some of its history was actually cut at the time, concurrent, when these pieces would have actually circulated. This is not that. This is something that had been cut much more recently, and I hypothesized that it looked like, along with the documentation that came with it, that it almost looks like a kid's show and tell project. This looks like something that maybe a middle schooler or a high schooler would have taken to school, or some kind of a 4-H kind of demonstration showing what these pieces would have looked like when they were cut down. Something that had been done within the last several decades. A little bit disappointing. Beggars can't be choosers. My dealer said that they had one. Now I've got one, and now I'm able to show it with you to illustrate what these pieces look like. A little bit of a disappointment, but Another random little piece of silver was shoved into this little grouping of cut pieces, along with the documentation, the little description of what it was. And I originally put it aside. Neither I nor my dealer had any idea what these pieces really were. I wasn't that concerned about it. I had bought several of these 8 reales from them in the past. They knew that I had always paid them promptly. They had always given me a good price. A deal was a deal. I went ahead and picked these up. They threw this extra little chunk in with it. When I got back home and was studying these pieces, I finally remembered that there was that extra little chunk thrown in with this group. And that's really where this whole journey began. Again, check out the video series if you hadn't, but the interesting thing about this piece is that something in the back of my mind was triggering that I had encountered this before. So I went down after deep rabbit holes trying to discover and uncover exactly what this piece was. I knew that it was cut from an 8 reale because it had some of the devices on the back of the coin that we're used to seeing. In particular, you're looking at this tower here and this passant dragon, right, or lion rather, right there. So I could surmise that this piece had been cut from an 8 reale, and that gave me a starting point. And the more I researched it, the more I realized that this piece was probably, at least it looked like it was, something called a bit that was used in the British colony of Trinidad, all the way back in the early 1800s. That's kind of where the research started, the rabbit holes really started, and that's really what propelled me on this. It was also part of a cut-up 8 reale, so it makes sense that it was kind of included with this set. But my fear was that this piece was probably something that had been cut at about the same time that our cut-up pieces had been put together in the 1970s, 1980s. The more I studied it, the more I was starting to rely on my experience as a coin collector. Over the last many decades, something was telling me that it was authentic. And unfortunately, I can't authenticate a piece like that. A Trinidad cut-up piece of an 8 reale going back to the early 1800s, that needs to be seen and verified by experts. But what I did do was to look at auction results of these pieces. There are very few of these 1811 Trinidad bits that are known. It's not surprising. They are quite small. It's not surprising that under the harsh environments where they were created to kind of fulfill a need of small change, these little pieces that were about the size of your fingernail would have been lost. Not many of them would have been created in the first place. Who knows how many of them survive? But I was able to pull up auction records, and we did just happen to have a very nice example that had sold at auction just a year or two ago that had sold for something on the order of $5,000. Wanting to make sure that the piece that I had found was authentic, I decided to send the piece to Numismatic Guarantee Corporation, who would verify the coin and then also offer it a grade. Now, if you followed this story up to this point, you know that the bulk of these pieces, these 1811 Trinidad bits, even though there are very few of them, they are not surprisingly in very poor condition. On a scale of 1 to 70, most of the existing pieces of these 1811 Trinidad bits grade very low. We're talking in the 8 to 10, maybe the 12 range out of that 1 to 70 scale. But I sent this piece off to NGC and I expedited it so that they would look at it very quickly. And when I finally had the grades posted, they have an integrated system where you can check the grading online once they have actually concluded their grading process. The 1811 Trinidad bit was authenticated and it was graded in XF45 on that 1 to 7 Sheldon grading scale, which means that this was the finest example that has ever been seen of the 1811 Trinidad bit. Now, the easiest thing to understand about this is that there are not a lot of collectors of colonial Trinidad coinage. There just aren't very many examples in the first place, and consequently, when you don't have a huge supply, you tend to not have a big demand. Nobody had any idea what this piece was worth, and I went through expert after expert after expert trying to determine what it was worth. By the time that I sent it to NGC, I had done a lot of research on the past experience with these. I have reached out to a lot of experts in the field, to coin dealers who specialize in colonial era pieces. And the long and the short is that I had to do some serious soul searching with what to do with this finest known 1811 Trinidad bit, now certified by NGC. So I had to really ask myself what the Dubsey's choice question always is. Given a choice between two pieces that are similar, which one would you choose? In this case, because there is nothing similar, this is the finest known example. I had to ask myself, if I had walked into that coin shop on that fateful day about a year ago, and I'd seen this already slabbed XF45 1811 Trinidad Bitt sitting in my dealer's display case, and they had it offered for $500, would I have bought it? And I asked myself this question over and over again. And I kept on coming up to the result that while I would have been very interested in it, I would have asked to see it, and if it had still been there a couple days later, I probably would have asked to see it again. I probably would not have paid $500 for it, keeping in mind that the previous record for one of these pieces was about $5,000. So if I wouldn't have bought it at $500, I definitely wouldn't have bought it at $5,000. So ultimately I decided it wasn't going to be part of my collection. I don't really collect this type of coin. So I sent it to Heritage Auctions to have it auctioned off. So that brings us up to about where the most exciting part of this story really begins. Heritage listed this coin in late September of 2025 in one of their very high-end platinum sale auctions. You're looking at the listing for this piece. Now, these auctions are very small. Typically, they don't offer more than a few hundred coins. Heritage often auctions off pieces. They have sales going continuously. They have 2 or 3 or 4 coin auctions every week of every year. But these platinum auctions don't come around very often. Heritage acknowledged that this piece was scarce enough to make it into this platinum auction. And it was listed, this coin was listed with lots of other rare coins. It was also a featured coin in the fact that it was the highest graded example, and it was tagged, and you're looking at this listing here that shows all of these attributes that Heritage had put into it. Heritage, one of the most respected coin auction companies in the world. They auction things other than coins. They also do artwork and lots of other interesting things. But in this case, it was definitely a platinum group coin auction. And it became, the 1811 Trinidad Bitt became one of the most highly watched coins in the auction, with nearly 1,000 views and over 30 people watching the coin. It's important to understand that these types of auctions tend to be wholesale auctions. While they are open to the public, and I have bid and won many, many coins in my experience in my years of being a coin collector and a bullion stacker, these are really almost geared towards dealers who have an audience of people that they can in turn sell these pieces to. So when you have 30 kind of higher end people watching a collection like this, watching this coin in particular, you knew that it was kind of a hot item. While all of this was going on, Heritage was jockeying these pieces, putting this collection together, I reached out to Numismatic Guarantee Corporation, the same folks that had just slabbed this piece, put it in their holder. And I kind of explained the importance that I felt this coin had and asked if they would mind promoting this piece, because I did think it needed a little bit of extra promotion, and I was excited to see NGC get behind it. They actually made it their coin of the day on October 1st of 2025. And in that case, NGC pushes the coin, beautiful images of it out across all of their social media platforms. So it was on Blue Sky, it was on Instagram, it was on Twitter, I believe it was on Facebook as well. They promoted the heck out of this piece, and I want to give NGC credit for having done that too. So many people learned about this piece that probably had never encountered one before, just like me. Heritage activated the auction around October 5th of 2025. And bids started happening around October 10th. There's always a little bit of lag while they're setting up their auctions. Online auctions happen in these types of scenarios for about a month prior to the auction going into a live format. So for about the 30 days that precede the auction, anybody can bid online as long as you're a qualified bidder. But then the last 24 hours of the auction, they kind of closed down the online bids in anticipation of having a live auctioneer hammering these pieces across the auction block like you've seen so many times in movies and TV shows. Major players, major dealers in the room while they do this final run at the auction. Heritage set a minimum price on this piece at $2,500, so that was the very minimum that somebody could bid on it. and they estimated the piece would sell between 5,000 and 7,500, if I remember correctly. The opening bid of $2,500 happened instantaneously. The first time that they opened bidding, somebody put that $2,500 bid in. But then there was literally no other movement on the coin between about October 15th and the day that this auction went to the live format. That was the evening of November 6th. Nobody bid on it at all. Now you can imagine me watching this piece, because you never know when something sells at auction. It could sell for the minimum, or it could not sell at all if it never meets that minimum. At least I knew that it was going to sell at that $2,500 range, but I had to ask myself, you asked yourself if you would have bought it at $500, would you have sold it for $2,500? And I knew in my heart that I probably wouldn't have. I would have probably just kept it for myself. But I was going to let the auction play out. I didn't really have much of a choice. It was placed as the very last coin in this 125, 150 small but important coin auction. And by the time the bidding actually went to the online format, to the in-person format, it had stopped at $2,700. Bidding on the other pieces in this auction was very strong. Everything seemed to be bid up immediately to the estimate that Heritage had put on these pieces, and in some cases they had doubled or tripled or quadrupled what the estimated sale price of these pieces were before they even went to the live auctioneer. And I had to admit, I had visions of sugar plums. The entire idea that this was the finest known example of this piece, I had anticipated that it would sell quite well. Nobody was bidding on it, and it was placed last in the auction. I hadn't lost hope, but I was starting to have doubts for sure. Finally, at the end of the day, after seeing some amazing pieces bid, including some incredibly rare Colonial issues that had doubled or tripled their auction estimates, the bid finally came up to the auctioneer's block. And for the first second that bidding was going on, there was nothing but crickets, and I knew that nothing was going to happen. And what seemed like an eternity passed before bids started pouring in. The bid went from $2,800 to $29,000 to $3,000, then it jumped up to $5,000. And when a bid jumps that high, the auction companies usually increase the increments. So instead of $100 increments, they boosted it to $500 increments. If you had interest, you had to pony up $500 to keep the bidding going. So it went $5,500, then $6,000, then $6,500, then $7,000, and then $7,500. And finally it hit $8,000. These auctions happened very quickly. The auctioneer cries out, last warning, this is your last opportunity. The entire auction would have taken just a few seconds. And the hammer slammed down at $8,000. Now, I was thrilled. The coin had been what I had hoped it had been. I was vindicated in the fact that I had done research, I had used my experience, I had sent this piece to NGC, I had promoted the heck out of the piece as much as I could. But then you also have to remember that Heritage, like many other auction companies, adds an auction buyer's premium to the final price. And by the time that Heritage did this, this is the price that the buyer actually had to pay. It boosted the price to $9,600, and now that is the record price for an 1811 Trinidad Bitt, $9,600. You'll see that this is the closed auction, and the people that were able to buy this piece and paid the $9,600 for it are now entertaining offers north of $14,000 for this piece. So the dust settled, and that was the aftermath. The piece sold for $9,600. Now, I did have to pay Heritage a small amount. They would have waived that if the piece had gone above a certain level. It didn't quite make it. I knew that ahead of time, right? While the bid closed the auction as the last one on November 6th, Heritage doesn't pay out the proceeds from an auction until every single piece has been paid for in that auction. And the moment the auction closes, they start sending out notifications to the winners that they have to pay immediately in order to secure their pieces. But they have a policy, and it is a very common policy, and they told me about it well in advance, that they don't actually start paying out for these pieces until they have closed the books on the auction entirely. And by so doing, they informed me that I would not receive the proceeds from the sale of this piece until December 22nd. So from November 6th to December 22nd, I had a bunch of money sitting in Heritage, and I started poring over what I was going to do with this cash. I am a huge fan of the conversion play, and this is the ultimate conversion play. To have taken something that neither I nor my dealer knew what it was, to be able to do the research, to have paid a small amount of money that was almost insignificant in the scheme of things, to have trusted sending the piece off to NGC, to trust my gut, to spend the $150, $200 in shipping and handling and grading fees, to arrange all of the experts to take a look at it, to speak with Heritage, to iron out the details, to send it in. But in order to actually capitalize on what this piece represented, I now had to turn it into something else. I had time to think about it, right? If I ever thought about this as an opportunity to go shopping, I've got a set amount of money that I can convert this piece that I would have turned down from maybe $500 in my local shop to getting something truly significant that I want to add to my collection. This was a really fun, but also slightly nerve-wracking thing. I didn't want to get this wrong because it was really the journey about this whole process that meant everything to me. The fact that I had gotten to this point as a YouTube content creator where I could have filmed this, recognize the potential significance of this piece, to be able to make all these bridges to all of these new experts who specialize in this, to be able to get them on board with this, to see what I saw in this piece was an amazing journey. And the fact that I was able to share it with you, and so many people have expressed fascination and interest with this whole journey, it's what makes coin collecting fun, right? We never know what treasures are around the corner. But it leaves the final question, which is, what did I do with the funds? So I'm really pleased to say, after nearly 3 months since that fateful auction evening, and after just about a year to the day when I first uncovered this piece and started down this journey, I've decided to purchase. Well, you're going to have to wait till part 2, right? This has got to be a cliffhanger. We've got to stretch this out a little bit further. If you have not seen the run-up to this entire auction and the result of this auction and what I did with the funds, again, I'll leave a link down below. I'm very excited to share this journey. It will be one package, so you can watch one video after the other, especially after we come to the conclusion of this journey. Or is it? At the next video. And I look forward to sharing that with you. If you have questions about anything that I talked about here today, whether it's the 1811 Trinidad Bitt, my journey into it, my exploration, NGC's confirmation, Heritage's auction and the sales result, definitely leave that question down below. You guys know that I'm fond of saying if you've got a question, there's a good chance somebody else does. Let's see if we can answer it for everybody. If you have not yet joined my channel, I encourage you to go ahead and click on that subscription button, but also hit the notification bell. That way you'll find out exactly where part 2 of this finale, where I unveil exactly what I bought with those funds. And believe me, it's an amazing piece. You're going to be amazed. At least I hope you will. Click on the notification bell. I launch new videos pretty much every Friday evening, and I'm there to watch the videos with you as they play for the very first time. But we also often go live immediately after that video premieres. That's called a live stream. And maybe you're watching this video with me on a Friday evening, and if you are, I encourage you to join the live stream immediately after this video premieres. To find out about the live streams, to find out about the premieres, all you have to do is click on that notification bell and join the channel. I like to end my videos by saying always be learning, and now you can see exactly why that is such an important thing to keep in your mind. Always be learning. And thank you for allowing me to be a part of your journey and for coming with me on this journey as we both go deeper into the world of coins and physical precious metals.